Hello, I'm Jackie Jones, a candidate for judge of the Court of Common Pleas of Delaware County. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about criminal court here in Delaware County. I'm thinking of talking about this topic because I think it's one of the biggest ones that comes up. As I travel around the county getting to know more and more people and letting people share with me their stories of the experience in the court and what they're looking for in a judge, they have encouraged me, many of you have encouraged me to keep sharing what a judge does and what the court does in these videos. We do this because, as I often say, a judge has the power to take your property, your child, or your very life. And yet, we don't know much about the people that we elect. This is an elected position. And we get out there as potential judge candidates and we tell you a lot about our legal background. I went to Georgetown University Law School, where I also have a master's degree in government. I have an undergraduate degree in politics and government. So the important functioning of government, including judges who are elected, is an important thing to me and has been for my entire life. But you have to also know more about the court that we are dealing with and what process it is and how we make our decisions. So let's talk about the Court of Common Pleas. The Court of Common Pleas is a trial level court. What does that mean? Basically what that means is that we are the court where your decisions are being made. Some of you may be familiar with the Magisterial District Court, which is a minor judiciary, meaning if you get a traffic ticket or if your kids, were at a party drinking or something like that, or if you were charged with a criminal offense and they need to know whether or not it's enough evidence to move to trial. Those are minor judiciary problems. But the Court of Common Pleas is the trial level court. So for those of you who understand, in Pennsylvania, you don't have to even be an attorney to be in the minor judiciary, to be a magisterial district judge. But you do have to be a practicing licensed attorney to be a judge here in the Court of Common Pleas, because these are actual matters that make decisions on things like whether or not someone is found guilty or innocent in a criminal case, whether someone is found to be liable in a civil case, whether a child will be home with their parents or in juvenile detention if they're in a juvenile case, orphans court, things like what happens if someone dies and what happens to their property, or what happens if there's a child whose parents' rights may be terminated or they want to be adopted. So there are a lot of things that we determine here in the Court of Common Pleas. So today we're talking criminal court. With criminal court, the process generally begins at the lower court in the magistrate or district judge. What happens is the police present what their evidence is through either a district attorney or through the affiant. That's what we call the person who writes up the affidavit of probable cause saying why this person's been arrested. There's usually a preliminary hearing, or someone can waive their preliminary hearing and, as we say here, take it straight to media. I don't want to be too lawyer sounding, because this is what people say, oh, your case is going to media. What they mean by that is it's going here, and I'm pointing here because literally right out this door is the Court of Common Pleas. I can see the judge's parking lot right outside my door. I'm hoping that next year, instead of parking on this side, I'm parking on that side, going from being the lawyer where my parking is here to the judge where my parking is there. So moving across the street. But in media, that is where our Court of Common Pleas is at 201 West Front Street. And so when people say my case was taken to media, what they mean is that it got past the minor judiciary, meaning district judge, to a trial proposition. Now, are trials the only thing that happen in criminal court? Absolutely not. In fact, if at the rate and volume of criminal cases we have, if every case went to trial, our court system would fall apart. Fall apart. We don't have enough rooms, we don't have enough judges, we don't have enough people power to make that happen. So actually, pleas and deals are a lot of a part of what goes on here. But how does a judge make a difference in that case, right? Because even with pleas, the judge can make a difference because the judge controls their courtroom, or they should. I say they should because I have been a criminal defense attorney for a long time here. I mean, I've been named a Super Lawyer Rising Star a couple of times, which I appreciate for criminal work. And I understand that sometimes the district attorney's office or the DAs in charge of that case handle a lot of the decision-making process, and they make a big difference in what happens in a judge's courtroom. However, a judge who really wants to efficiently move through justice is going to make sure that he or she is actively involved in negotiations to the extent that they can, or facilitating an atmosphere of negotiation. What does that mean? It means that as a judge, I'm not going to sit in as the DA says, well, I'll give you 5 years, and the defense attorney says, we'll only take 1. I'm not going to sit in and put myself in a position where I know too much about the case that I may have to later try. That's not the way to do it. The way to do it, however, though, is to sit with the defense and the prosecution and work on things like, are the two of you talking, right? There are times when, because of the way things have been set up and because the judge doesn't require it, that people show up to court for pretrial conferences and they have not talked at all. They have no idea of where they're close or where they're far apart. There's also some other things they don't know. How long will your trial take? How much time should we set aside? Will this be a bench trial, meaning the judge makes a decision about facts as well as the law, Or will this be a jury trial where the jury decides the facts and the judge decides the law? That makes a difference in how the timing is done. Are there things that we can stipulate to or agree to on the record that can make the trial move along easier? That is part of the job of the judge, to make things run smoothly, to make sure things are moving forward. The job of the judge is not to push on behalf of one side or the other. I'm going to say it again. It's not our job to push the prosecution or the defense. And I know some judges get a little confused about their role. Your job as a judge is to make sure that you facilitate this process so that they can work together as much as possible. And then when you get to the point where we can come no closer, then you make sure the trial moves along smoothly. And so here are some of the things that happen in criminal court. We know the adult criminal court happens here in the criminal division, obviously, right? There's also a juvenile court, which is criminal but handled separately. There are our treatment courts, which includes mental health court, second chance court, veterans court. Those are all courts that are set up to deal with criminal cases and people in special circumstances. There are divisions of probation and parole that are involved with the court. There's an intermediate punishment. So there are a lot of things that happen in the courtroom process as it relates specifically to criminal court. Now, why is it important that you choose a judge who understands this? First and foremost, as the kids would say, this job is not for play. My kids will probably say, stop talking like that. But what I mean by that is this is a serious endeavor. You need someone who's ready on day one to walk into that courtroom and make good decisions. You can go to judge school, but it doesn't last long, which means someone who understands and has litigated in that court, like me, that's important. Someone who understands the rules and procedures and thinks on their feet, like me, that's important. Because when you're in a jury trial, you don't have time to go, let me look at all my books and try to figure out whether the business records exception applies here, right? That's not what you have time to do. When you are making a decision as a judge during a trial, you have to be quick and you have to be right. There's some time for working things out and looking at the law, but you have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of a lot of different things in order to be a judge and in order to be an effective judge. So that's one thing you're going to do. You also need someone who understands local rules. I practice here in Delaware County. I've always practiced in Delaware County. I know the local rules. Why are local rules important? Because those are the shorthands that we use to get around our courthouse here. So, for instance, and, there are certain ways that we present things. There are certain ways that, for instance, we're not one of those courtrooms that likes for people, meaning the attorneys, to be in a confrontational mode with the witnesses. We don't stand up and get in the witness's face. That's not how we do. And I know in some courts, the attorney's always standing. We're always sitting for the most part. You usually ask permission if we're going to stand, if we're going to approach the witness. This is some of the kind of things that happen locally that you need to be aware of as you're, and why attorneys are doing things a certain way, because that's what we're used to here. I think it's also important to know the people, to know your way around. I won't need a map to get around the court on my first day. I know the judge's chambers are on the 3rd floor. That's our shorthand, and we're going to the 3rd floor. I know where to go. I know where to be. I know who the players and the people are. Why? because sometimes you won't know exactly what you need to do, right? As a new judge, you should be able to find a mentor and have someone that you can ask questions with, someone that you can feel comfortable going to. Well, I know all the judges here and all the divisions for the most part, and so I'd be very comfortable going to them, and I think most of them be very comfortable being truthful with me about things that, you know, we don't know until we're in that clique. So that's another important aspect, you know, having that knowledge. But knowing the way that things work together too, knowing the way that juvenile records and juvenile justice plays into adult sentencing. The thing that I have not explained to you yet is that we don't know what court, what division will be in when we're first elected. The president judge makes a decision on where to place us. So, as someone who has already done work in every division of our courthouse, I'm uniquely qualified to be in any court that the president judge chooses to put me in. But today we're talking criminal, so let's talk a little bit more about that. So, for instance, one of the things you get is a sentencing guideline. If you're, let's say we're doing a criminal court and you've someone who is found guilty or someone who's pled guilty, the judge gets a sentencing guideline, and the judge gets to make a sentence based on that. Now, let's be very realistic. A majority of cases in Delaware County and throughout other places too, not just here, are solved by pleas. They're solved by pleas because the system runs smoother with pleas. Both the DA and the defense attorneys understand that they can't always fight every case. Thank you, Tammy. Tammy Forbes for district judge. So we know that there's always going to be that. But what I would like to be as a judge, and I'm not trying to disrupt the system to the point where I say everything has to be a trial, but what I would like to be as a judge is someone that both sides can say is fair. They may not agree with my decisions, and I'm sure they won't always agree with my decisions, but I want them to know that it's based on the law and that it's an understandable law and there's an understandable logic to my decisions. So there will be a period of time if I'm placed in criminal court where both the DAs and the defense attorneys will be testing me. And that's their right, and I think it's their duty. Why is that? Because when I go to a client and I say to them, you should have a bench trial or you should have a jury trial, it should be based on experience. I don't walk into a courtroom and say, look, I don't know what this judge is going to do. No, you want to use your wisdom as a defense attorney, which I am, to make a good decision for a client. And so the same thing will happen after I become a judge. They will be testing out my theories. I think there are probably some people who think, well, Jackie's a defense attorney, so she's always going to be pro-defense. That's not the case. I'm a defense attorney, which means that I know that sometimes my defendants are guilty and sometimes they're not. I know because I've been on both, on that side of it. But it's important to me as someone who has been on the side where it's a little more difficult because the police are already working from the beginning of the case. And so the prosecution side from the beginning has people working. So when you're a defense attorney, you're always playing catch up. For the most part, no one calls you and says, I just committed a crime, start your investigation. Doesn't happen, right? No. So, as a defense attorney, I was always playing catch up, and I was always really quick, trying to get it moving. As a judge, what I want to do is set up a process where the defense, since they are the ones who are supposed to have the benefit of the doubt under our laws, do not feel that they're unfairly advantaged by me, right? They're always going to feel like there's an unfair advantage to the district attorneys. They're the other side. That's a natural part of the process. But they should never feel as if the judge has made up her mind before she walks into a room. And so my goal would always be to be as fair as possible, to be as open-minded as possible, to listen to all sides. What are some other things that come up in criminal court? The grading of offenses, that's something that comes up. Sometimes there's a choice between whether something's charged as like a third-degree felony versus a first degree. Obviously, you want the third degree if you're the defendant. You want it to be less, you want a little bit less punishment versus a first degree. So there's always an issue with the judge as to, if it's a bench trial, whether we're going to find them guilty of the highest or the lowest or sometimes the mid-tier offenses. There's also something the judges do that I think people are not very aware of. There's something called an open guilty plea. Now, why am I telling you about that? See, See, I tried to swipe so I wouldn't see the comments, and look what happened. So, I'm telling you about the open guilty plea because that is when it matters the most who you chose as a judge. That matters the most in criminal cases because in an open guilty plea, the judge makes the decision on what the punishment is. That means everyone agrees that the crime was committed. Everyone agrees on the grading of the crime, but the judge has to make a decision. And one of the things the judge has to do is be familiar with the sentencing guidelines. There's a big book I have over here. Could have brought it for you all to see. And I jokingly tell my clients sometimes, I became a lawyer because I didn't want to do all this math, and here I am. When you're looking at those sentencing sheets, you're looking at prior records, you're looking at prior offenses, and you're looking at the current offense. And you're trying to determine whether this is someone who should be sentenced in the mitigated range, meaning there may have been special circumstances that should help them, whether they should be sentenced in the standard range, which is where most people should fall, or whether they should be sentenced in the aggravated range, which is when they did something just a little worse than other similarly situated people. Who you choose as a judge is important in times like that, because a judge has to know how to be compassionate when necessary. But a judge cannot forget to be tough to protect people. Now, this is the part that, to me, goes back to what your values are. You see, I have talked a lot on the trail about my qualifications, and everyone knows I have these degrees and I have this law practice I've managed for 16 years and I can do the job. But my experience having suffered as a victim from my family, my experience having been on the other side of the court system, I realize that it's not just about the defendant's rights, which are paramount in our system, but it's also about understanding that victims feel heard in this process as well. Victims have to feel heard. They have to feel like their story was told. They have to feel like we're protecting them. We also have to be compassionate about people who may have addictions and who may need treatment. One of the things that's been very difficult for me as an attorney is that I look sometimes at a client and they've been through the system cycling 3, 4, 5 times or more. And I look at their first offense and I go, wait a second, your first offense made it very clear to me that you have a drug problem, an alcohol problem, that you have some kind of addiction. And my concern continues to be that very first time that we got this person into the court, I don't know why we didn't get them into treatment. So when you're a judge and you're thinking about being compassionate, you have to think about what solutions there are, including treatments, that might actually prevent the person from offending again. Why is that important? It's important because, one, the person has bettered themselves, which means they can be a productive member of the society. 2, the victim feels safer, because if someone has been to your house and and they broke in, or you're worried about them, and this person has now had drug or alcohol treatment and they're working and they're not out there and knocking people over the head, you feel safer. It saves a lot of money. It saves a lot of money in the system because obviously when someone is no longer a drain on the system, they're no longer in jail, they're no longer cycling through over and over again, it doesn't cost the taxpayers as much money. And it's the human thing to do. It's the human thing to do. So that's kind of my take on the criminal court system. Obviously, there's another level after all of this, after there has been a not guilty or a guilty. There's usually a chance for someone to appeal. If someone's been found guilty, especially, they have a right to appeal. At that point, you need a judge who can justify their decision. That means someone who's a strong writer, which I am. Someone who is able to use effectively law clerks and other staff who can help do research and writing, which I absolutely would do. And someone who can back up what they say with the law. And I think that's where you begin. You try to back up what you're doing and saying with the law. So that is a little bit about the criminal court in a nutshell. Thank you for joining me. And again, I'm Jackie Jones, running for judge of the Court of Common Pleas. Have a great day.